Hey there, welcome to Synth Seeker. My name is Luke. We're doing handheld today. I've got just a brief video I wanted to share with you guys. It's about shopping, specifically shopping for synthesizers. I was looking back and I've had a really good year musically and from a synth collector, synth player standpoint. Just the last four purchases of synths I made, I'm super happy about. I love the synths. There's zero regrets, and for me, that's saying something because for many years I bought and sold and bought and sold and dealt with regret and being unhappy, and then getting rid of something, and then coming back and saying, "Oh shit, I didn't realize it could do that. I better go buy it again," and that sort of stuff. But I finally sort of leveled out, or maybe pulled out of the nosedive. And I've sort of got this mental framework that helps me shop for synthesizers. I thought I'd share it with you guys here because I want everyone to buy more synths. I like the synth community. So buy more synths and, let's talk about them. So here's the thing. I simplify the framework down. I simplify synthesizers down, all right, into just a few sort of categories of things I can look at and count and sort of try and understand on a synthesizer to be able to compare synths with each other, right? When I'm making purchases, what do I want? To understand what it is I'm buying in relation to the collection I have and the synths that I'm currently playing with, all right? And it works like this, all right? Every synth has inputs, right? This synthesizer has keys, it's got MIDI that comes in, it'll take CV and gate in, all right? So those are the inputs to this synthesizer. It's got three methods. I can count them and understand what they are, right? And then synthesizers may or may not have what I'm lumped together and call players, all right? Players are things like sequencers and arpeggiators, things that take the input and then turn it into more note events, right? They're tools, they're little bonus utilities that the synth may provide. Now, this synth does not provide any sequencing, no arpeggiation, right? So it doesn't have it. Okay, so I understand that when it's time to go shopping, right? The next sort of bucket of things I look at on a synth are what I call wave sources, right? For my shopping, purchasing, point of view, I don't really care too much about all the different ways to make waves, right? This is analog waveforms, right? And some other synth maybe use other methods, phase distortion, FM, whatever, wavetable samples. I just look at them as how many wave sources does the synth have, and what's their flavor? Are they really complex? Are they really flexible? Are they really, simple? And then basically I can use that as a comparison for the synths, or at least to increase my understanding of what it is I'm buying. All right. Again, the whole point of this is that I'm really happy with my last few purchases, and I've been approaching them using this sort of perspective framework. So every synth has wave sources, right? We're going to walk through this synth, and then we're going to walk through a completely different synth, and we can compare. All right. So wave sources come in. Now, after the wave sources, every synth has shapers of some kind, right? Sometimes shapers are distortion or wave folding or hard sync. These are shapers, things that shape the waves that come from the wave sources, right? Filters are shapers, right? Some shapers add harmonic content and some take it away, right? Filters generally take it away, but with a little resonance, you can be adding them. So we have shapers. Shapers shape the sounds that come from the wave sources, all right? And you could count how many shapers does a synth have? How many does it offer? Or what's their flavor? Are they complex? Are they, really complicated and have lots of options and features? Or are they just really simple, right? And a distortion circuit's like turn up the gain, make it get crunchier. But like a wave folder could be potentially really interesting. And so you've got shapers, all right? And then after shapers, you get really the magic of a synth is modulators, right? I look at what sort of modulators does a synth have, right? Modulators are things like envelopes and LFOs and all the various flavors of things that control the wave sources, and they control the shapers, and they can also control themselves. Modulators can self-modulate or modulate other modulators, right? But these are things you can count on a synth, and then look at them and understand their flavor and see how they interact with things, right? right? So we're building up this framework of simplified concepts for analyzing what a synth is capable of, all right? At a purchase level, not at a scientific level, but at the level of, do I want to buy it or not? Do I want to take out and put my hand in that most holy place, my wallet, and then put some money out for it, right? So anyway, so where are we? We're inputs, players, wave sources, shapers, modulators, and then outputs, right? This synth has some outputs, different kinds of headphones, multiple outputs, whatever, right? So that's my perspective. That's that little framework that I've been using for the last year or so to analyze a synth before I buy it and to try and help me make sure that I'm going to be happy with it and it will do what I want and I'll be, a happy camper. So let's use it. Let's compare. So looking at this Model D, all right, it's got inputs, keyboard, CV, gate, MIDI, fine, right? Does it have any players? No. This doesn't have a sequencer or an arpeggiator on it. Okay. Wave sources. Well, it's got 5 of them. It's got 3 oscillators, right? And then it's got some noise, and you can do external input, okay? Or loop back and plug it in, right? So that's fine. So it's got 5 sources. Well, what kind of shapers does it have? Well, it's pretty limited, right? It's got a mixer. Mixers are shapers, right? Because you can combine the different wave sources that are coming in, right, and mix them together and change the output of the wave source by mixing, right? And you can overdrive a mixer too. You get some distortion here from this thing. So that's one. And the other shaper it's got is a filter. It's got a low-pass filter. Right? So we can do that. And then you can look and do the research, read the manual, talk to friends about what are the properties of the mixer, what are the properties of the filter, right? You can do your research when you're shopping. You can go read those drool-proof paper glossies, all the marketing materials. And that's fine. But this has 2 shapers, a mixer and a filter. And really that's about it, okay? It doesn't have any effects, right? It doesn't have any, inline things. And so, move on. So our sort of other bucket then is those modulators. Does it have modulators? Yeah, it's really got 4 modulators. It's got an envelope for a filter. It's got an envelope for an amplifier. It's got a single LFO. Actually, it's got 2 LFOs. It's got this one here, and oscillator 3, in addition to being a wave source, can also be an LFO. All right, so it's got 4 modulators. And once you understand how many modulators a thing has, you can sort of look at them and say, well, how can I route them? Like, how can I apply those modulators? Well, this filter envelope, it can only be applied to the filter, okay? Where else could it be applied? You can also route the filter envelope to pitch, okay? And the LFO can be routed to pitch or it can be routed to filter frequency, okay? And then the amplifier envelope can only go to the amplifier, right? So this is pretty limited modulation routing abilities, right? But you can look at it and understand, all right, fine. You don't need to inherently, dump all of the possible routings, because as you'll see on a more complex synth, it gets, combinatorial, it gets fractal. You can't fit them all in your head. But it's enough to allow you to compare, right? So that's this synth. And then we have outputs in the back, right? Or headphones. So let's look at a more complex synth. All right, so here's an Iridium, right? This is the most complex synth I have, right? Let's look at it in terms of this framework, right? So what sort of inputs does it have? Well, it doesn't have a keyboard, right? We use an external keyboard for it, so it takes MIDI in, and it'll take CV and gate, right? It's also got this little touchpad, right? So we can do that too. And this provides some functionality around scales and note selection and things like that, right? So that's input. Now, does it have any players? Well, yeah, it's got an ARP and it's got a sequencer, right? And so those have various levels of features, right? You can compare, if the other synth had an ARP and a sequencer, you could compare, how many notes in the sequencer, or is it an infinite number of notes as far as memory and CPU is concerned, right? ARP, what kind of patterns does it have? Things like that. So there are some properties around players that you can compare, but really for purchasing, I just go, does it have an ARP and a sequencer? Yeah, all right, maybe I'll dig in a little bit. So that's players. Well, what about sound sources? Well, it's got 3, 1, 2, 3, right? These sound sources are way more complex than the one on the Model D, right? Each sound source has 5 different synthesis methods in it, right? And each of those synthesis methods has lots of parameters, options, things you can tweak, all right? And that's going to matter when we think about modulation, right? So sound sources, it's got 3, and they're really complex. It's going to take a long time to learn all those, dig into them, but that's fine. So there's 3. So that's sound sources. Does it take external input as well? It does. You can take that as well, so it's got a 4th. All right. So past sound sources, wave sources. What's next? Well, shapers. Well, synths have filters, right? So this has two filters, right? It's got a mixer as well. And in fact, the mixer can be routed so that you can actually do a lot of different sort of routings for that. Interesting. What other shapers does it have? It's got a digital former. What's a digital former, right? The digiformer. Well, let's go play with it. All right, so it's sort of like, looks like it can mostly be another filter, so like a third filter. Then also provides a number of things. Drive, gain, could be distortion, bit crusher, ring mod, stuff like that. I'm not doing a laundry list of all the things in the synth. I'm saying from the perspective of making a purchase and looking at it through this framework, I'm counting shapers, right? So mixer, a couple filters, the digiformer, which is yet another filter or an effect. And then, effects. Right? What has it got? It's got 5 effect slots, and these effects could be one of many. So it's got, at least another 8 or 10 other effects. So this synth, from a comparison perspective, it's like, how many shapers does it have? Well, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, plus effects, 5 slots there, 9. So 9 potential shapers that can be done. All right. Okay, and we're not even getting into all the properties on we'll talk about that in a second. So shapers. Now let's talk about modulation. Right? And well, what does it have for modulation sources? Well, it's got really on the front panel, it's got 6 envelopes, right? And it's got 6 LFOs. That's 12 modulation sources right off the bat. All right. Well, let's look at the mod matrix. Okay, so it's also got a mod matrix, so you can route a lot of different sources to a lot of different destinations. Great. What kind of sources do we have? All sorts of sources. There's our envelopes, there's our LFOs, then there's all this other stuff, plus MIDI CCs, velocity, right? Limitless. So we got a huge array of modulation sources and an equal number of destinations, or almost equal. Actually, a far greater number of destinations. Well, what is a destination for a mod source? Modulators go and they lay their hands on the wave sources and the shapers, and then other modulators if you need be. Again, it can get real recursive. But what that does is when you're doing your purchase, when you're shopping, gives you some sort of scope that you can think about and reason on to say, okay, that first synth had 4 modulators and 2 shapers and 5 noise wave sources. Okay, so had a low number of modulators, and they can be applied to those shapers and those wave sources. So I understand what that is. This synth has 3 wave sources. It has 12 or more shapers, and it looks like it has 40 or more modulators, right? And then the routing is very potentially complex, but much more flexible on this synthesizer, right? So doesn't mean it's better, but it informs your purchase to understand. It's like, what's your tolerance for complexity, right? You may look at this and it's like putting someone in a cockpit when all they really wanted to do was ride a bike. Yeah, so that's fine. So I use this framework to compare, okay? And really, it's made me super happy. In the last year, I've picked up 4 synths, and all of them are just happily ensconced in the collection, and I'm using them regularly. The music I made last year, I'm really happy with. Put out an EP, put out a couple singles, and then this January, I've been doing a piece, some sort of jam or snippet every day for the month of January, and it's working out great. I walk into the studio, and I look at all these synths, and there's no regret. I look at them and I go, I am a conductor, you are my orchestra. Let us compose some music. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. Basically, use that as you will. If that sort of perspective of looking at synths helps, great. But gas isn't really a thing anymore. Gas is not gas for me. Whenever I used to, gas is entertaining. Everybody does a gas video or has a discussion about it. and they say, oh, gas has got me. I really wanted one of these things. This came out. They announced this was coming, and gas grabbed my ass and said, you want one of these, don't you? Well, gas is an elevation of desire, right? I wanted one for my collection. It was like, this'll be a capstone of my collection. I feel good about that. And I wanted one. Well, what happens with gas, from my perspective, really, is that gas is the sort of pushing away of the desire, pushing it to a little dark corner of our brain, our id, our ego, whatever, and saying, that's not me. That's not me. It's the gas. It's a syndrome, gear acquisition syndrome. It's a disease. And catching a disease isn't my fault, right? We don't get upset when we get a cold or a flu, right? maybe in COVID times you do, but poor choices perhaps. But calling it gas elevates it, anthropomorphizes it, and puts it away to say it's really not I'm not responsible for that. That's the gas talking. And I just don't see it that way anymore for me. I think gas is irrelevant. If I want to go shopping, I want to go shopping. And I have these 5 rules to determine how to keep gas away, and those rules are okay, but it's much simpler than that now, right? If I want to go shopping for a synth, okay, it really comes down to, can I afford it? Do I have the money, right? This was my last purchase, and I'm still paying for it. Okay, so there ain't no more synths coming for a little while. But on top of that, I say, okay, I want a synth. Does that synth, overlap with other synths I've already got? Is it making the same sound? Is it redundant? And if so, that's an informed part of my purchase decision. And then secondly, I say, okay, well, also the synths I already have, do I know how to use them? Because sometimes, we get carried away in our shopping and we'll say, oh, I want one of those, and I want one of those, and I want one of those, right? Now you've got 3 synths, and maybe you're focusing on the last one. If you're like me, you always focus on the most recent purchase, right? And these other ones you forget about. You never learned them. And then you move on, you get to see another thing you want. Oh, I want that too. Well, that thing happens to, overlap 90% with this first thing that you haven't even looked at yet. You need to own that. Don't push that out and say, this is gas doing this to me. It's not my fault. Own it is my perspective at this point. There is no gas. Gas is a myth, right? It's you and me. Are we grown-ups, right? Really, that's about it. So I just wanted to share that with you guys. I thought maybe it might help, maybe not. If nothing else, it's an entertaining story, and I like hearing the sound of my own voice. So there you have it. I need to get to work on my January video for today. So with that, I leave you to either shred me in the comments or just ignore this video. So it's just another story time. And I appreciate any time you spend with me. I'll talk to you later on the comments or in the Discord. And thanks for your time. As always, you've been watching Synth Seeker. Have a great week.